Hello and welcome back to Sidequest. This is our video game show here at Geekverse. It's me, Dylan, here today for another solo episode where I'm going to be talking about the Super Smash Bros. Single player modes from over the years. You might be asking yourself, why are you doing this? Why are you doing it right now? This is very not irrelevant to any Smash news, but I just felt like talking about this. I was thinking about the single player aspect of these games the other day and thought it'd be fun to kind of really go through the history of them, break it down, and then, of course, close it off with a ranking, as I love to do. And just see kind of how the single player aspect of these games that is primarily seen as a multiplayer game, how that's evolved and changed and added and received additions and gotten rid of other modes over the years. So we're gonna do that. I think this is gonna be a fun time. Um, yeah, because Super Smash Bros. One of my favorite, probably my favorite series at this point. I think Elder Scrolls would be like the number two or the competitor to it. But really, just at the end of the day, I love this series so much. I'm such a nerd about it in terms of like the roster additions and all the changes and updates it's received through all its iterations. And it's always been a series that, as a kid too, when I didn't have a friend over to play, I would go to these single player modes and play them endlessly and try and get high scores or just complete them, or maybe it's just doing them to get the unlocks and whatever it is, but just playing for hours and hours. And even still today, I'll jump into Ultimate and play through some of these single player modes. It's still something I'm interested in. So yeah, I think it's an underrated aspect of these games, or an under talked about part about these games perhaps. So I think the way we're going to do this is I'm going to go game by game, talk about the different modes that existed in them, kind of explain them, because for some people, maybe it's been a long time since you've played Melee or Brawl or Smash 64, and you kind of forget what some of the modes were in those games. So we'll talk about them, make some comparisons, and then we'll do the ranking part at the end. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm just going to play some random gauntlet footage that we have of Smash Bros. Stuff. So this is not relevant to the single player part of it, but it just gives you a little something to watch along with. And apologies for the stretched or compressed images here. This is what we got, so I'm just going to play it so I don't get copyright striked on anyone else's content. Okay, so let's start with, of course, Smash 64, or I guess just called Super Smash Bros., kind of now known as 64. This is the first game in the series, of course, and it started out with what is now called classic mode, but it was really just called one player mode, one player game back in the day. And this is the most essential of the single player modes. And it is essentially just like, between, I think it's like 8 to 10 different battles that you're doing. You'll start out, you pick a character, and then you go and you fight Luigi. And then you maybe get like a team battle later on, a 2v2, or maybe you have to do a 3v1, or maybe you have to fight Metal Mario. Other little things will pop up, little mini modes in between there. But for the most part, you just play through these series of battles, couple exhibition matches, I guess you could say, and then close it off with the boss fight against Master Hand or Crazy Hand, or both. Along with that, in Smash 64, you also have a training mode. This might seem like a weird one to throw in here, but this is definitely a single player mode that people would use just to test things out or practice. It's often used for competitive players, and it's a weird one because, like, a lot of people who play these games casually will probably never use the training mode. Even someone like me who does play these games competitively, very rarely do I actually use the training mode. When Ultimate first came out, I used it for practicing certain things, or in Melee, I'll do it a little bit, but it's really not something that I use very often, and probably a lot of people don't. But it's interesting because it's been in every game and it's useful for some people, and it is a mode nonetheless. And then I think the two kind of main side ones here in Smash 64 is, of course, you have break the targets and board the platforms, which some people might forget about. Break the targets is iconic for the series, and this is, each character has their own special course, and in this course, there's 10 to 15 targets. You have to go around, smash them as quick as possible, and it's kind of a high score thing of trying to beat your best times. And some of them might even just be puzzles in terms of like, oh, how do I hit this certain target? It's in a really weird spot, so maybe you have to use a specific move from a character or get into a certain location, and there's all sorts of different shortcuts and things like that. So yeah, in Smash 64, there's 12 different courses, one for each character. And that was the same for Board the Platforms, which is a mode that has never returned and has not even really ever seen an iteration on. It's kind of just lost to time back in the N64 era. And in Board the Platforms, pretty simple, you would just have to land on, I think, yeah, once again, between 10 and 15 different platforms. So you'd have to just essentially do this platforming challenge to get around. And once again, this is very much about the speed of it, trying to do it quickly. But for some of them, I remember, like Samus, for example, has one that's way out in the far right, and just with regular jump, double jump, up B, you might not get there, so you'll have to use some down B bomb shenanigans or other, and you do like a reverse charge shot to boost yourself over there. So you'll have to kind of know these different things in order to board all these platforms. It's an interesting mode, and one I'm going to talk about a bit later in terms of interesting that it has never really appeared again. So that's kind of it for Smash 64. Pretty simple game, the first game in the series. And I think even in the one-player game, I think the break the targets and the board the platforms occur within that mode. So it's kind of all integrated together. I want to actually take a quick little side tangent here to talk about, like, especially with Smash 64 and then going into the other games, like, what is really the purpose, or why are these modes here? Why are they keep adding and changing and making updates to them? And obviously it's just like it's something fun to do, but there's kind of more to it in these games, where there's always the aspect of you're doing these single player modes often to unlock characters and stages to use in the versus mode and just regular Smash. Maybe it's completing challenges, like Ultimate has this big challenge board of all these different things. Brawl had like this museum type thing where you can smash these different tiles, accomplish these different challenges. Other unlocks like trophies, stickers, spirits, music, costumes for Mii fighters. Those appear in different games. Wii U had the unlocking of special moves, right? You could change out special moves. There was different versions of them, so that was a big part of it. And then like the high score chasing that I mentioned with Smash 64 there. So I think it's good to remember those things, that outside of just something fun to do, like there is purpose for doing these things, and often even if you are a multiplayer only kind of player, you will have to engage with the single player to some extent to get these characters and stages unlocked so that you have more to play with when you get into those other modes. Okay, moving along. Melee. Melee had quite a few additions, and I'll do a recap after of what modes were kind of dropped in between and which ones received iterations. But yeah, in Melee, I'd say the biggest addition was kind of two: adventure mode and event mode. Adventure mode is kind of an evolution of classic mode in that you're playing through these variety of battles that leads into a boss fight at the end. But this one kind of added more platforming sequences. You have that first level, we're going through Mushroom Kingdom. There's the iconic one of the underground maze for the Zelda one, where you have to go and try and find the Triforce. There's the kind of escape sequence from Metroid that you get to do. So you have these other elements taken from these different games and what they would be like in a Smash version. So it's similar to classic mode, where you still have those battles, but then it's maybe a bit more of a story, a bit more of a progression, and a bit more consistent in between characters. And it's kind of about beating them at higher difficulties or just unlocking them all, because you have to beat adventure mode, I think, with every character to get Game & Watch unlocked, for example, so you'll need to play through it a lot. And then along with that, there is the event mode, as I mentioned. So this is kind of a series. I think there was like maybe 40 to 60 events in Melee and different tiers and all that. And an event would either be pick your character, or it's a select character. You're using Mario for this one, and it give you a very specific challenge, kind of like maybe a boss fight, or it might just be you're really weak and small, and maybe there's like a big enemy that you're fighting against, things like that. And yeah, there was all sorts of them in there, and you unlock them, and they'd give you different unlocks as well. This was where the addition of Home Run Contest is, which is of course an iconic Smash Bros. Single player mode, which is, there's just a dummy, a punching bag. You have to beat it up a little bit and smash it with the home run bat and see how far you can get, and very much a high score chasing sort of game mode there. And then there's the addition of All-Star, which once you unlock all the characters, you get All-Star mode. And this is just essentially an Iron Man, where you have to pick one character and you have to fight every single member of the cast. It starts out with one-on-one battles, and then eventually have 1-on-2s. I think 1-on-3s probably at some point too, so it gets pretty hard near the end. And then I think you have to fight like 100 Game & Watches or something when you get to the last level. So that's fun. That's just playing one character, destroy the whole cast. A very fun addition to the series. I think that's kind of it for Melee. Definitely a few additions there. Retains the classic mode, of course. Training mode and break the targets is the exact same as it was in Smash 64. Each character has their own map. Moving on to Super Smash Bros. Brawl, quite a few additions here as well. So Brawl made a change to break the targets, and this is where I'm actually going to kind of consider it a different mode. I'll just call it the 5-level break the target. So obviously in Smash 64 and Melee, as I mentioned, break the targets, each character had their own map that they would do, and it was designed around their movement capabilities, their projectiles, and it was even kind of themed after them. Smash 64 is pretty basic, but in Melee they went more with like visual themes that kind of match the characters. Not all of them have that, but some of them do. And then in Brawl, the change was there was 5 levels of difficulty, but it was the same 5 maps for each character. So if you pick Sonic, there's an easy map, there's a very hard map, and there's every level in between. But every character, Marth, Mario, all of them are going to have the exact same target maps. So because of that, you're getting less, I guess, unique setups in terms of like, oh, maybe this target is just impossible to hit for someone like Roy, but someone like Jigglypuff can reach out there and hit it. But you're not going to really see that with this Brawl one because it kind of has to be homogenized so that every character can do it. There's also items added to it, which I think helped for specific situations where maybe certain characters couldn't reach a certain spot. So it still exists, and there's still a lot to it. If you want to like do it with every character on all difficulties, that would be a lot. But it's definitely less unique than the previous games. The biggest addition of Brawl is, of course, the Subspace Emissary, which is taking that Melee Adventure mode, taking the Smash 64 Classic mode, you could say, and really just blowing it up into a huge story. And this is one of the most iconic modes in all of Smash. And yeah, it's just a longer single-player story, huge like CGI cutscenes that were really, really beautiful, tons of platforming sequences, unique battles, boss battles. This is a main way to unlock a lot of the characters throughout the game. This would be the kind of the primary way you would probably do that. And yeah, it was kind of included all the characters at different points in the story, and then you could build up this roster, and then you could pick in certain sequences who you wanted to play as. Other sequences you'd be forced to play as a certain character. Just an amazing mode. The Subspace Emissary introduced so many unique character designs. There was a lot of original designs in terms of the enemies that you're fighting there. Led into a final battle against Taboo, who was an interesting boss fight, who was, I don't think, ever appeared again in a Smash game. He was kind of only there in Brawl. I think once you unlocked everything in Brawl, you would get the boss battles mode as an unlock. This is kind of similar to, I guess you would say, like All-Star. I forget how you unlocked it, but this was essentially just a boss rush. You could just pick a character and play through all the boss fights that were in Subspace back to back to back, and it had different difficulties as well. Interesting to note that the boss battles mode has never been used in another game. Ultimate, you would think, should have that kind of thing, but it never did for some reason. And I don't think Smash 4 really had new or any boss battles at all, so it wouldn't make sense for that game to have it. But Ultimate, really weird that was never added to it, even through like a DLC update or something, right? And then a huge update in Brawl as well, or addition rather, is the stage builder, which you might not think about as a single player mode because you're maybe building stages that you'd play with your friends on, but the actual builder part of it is definitely a single player thing. Growing up, I always loved stage builders in games, map editors. I think of like Tony Hawk's Underground and how I'd make maps in there forever. Something like Scribblenauts, I was like checking out the stage builder there. Always something that I was interested in and I like to do, which Halo as well, the Forge mode there, which makes sense now that I'm kind of making games of my own. Cheap plug, go check out My Game Potion Problem on Steam. It's coming out soon. But I always found that the Smash one, even though this was my favorite series, was very lacking. I think for a few reasons. Like one, visually, I don't know, you can never really make like a good looking map, which is too bad. There was very few like additions to it. Like it'd be cool if you could take like, I don't know, the windmill from Pokemon Stadium and make that on your map, or take these just iconic elements, like maybe even like the Metroid, how the lava rises up. It'd be cool if you could add a feature like that to these maps, but it was very bare bones, very basic. And even though this was a feature in Smash for Wii U and Smash for Ultimate as well, they didn't really add a ton. They've never made it very easy to find and download maps. Like you would have to get a code, so you'd have to like go on Reddit, find a map, check the code, download it through your game. Like it was never just like, there was never a search feature within the actual game itself, even though all the way back in Brawl it did have online play, so there was that online functionality, but they didn't think to have something like that. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of potential there in terms of could have been maybe like those additional features I'm talking about could have been things you were unlocking through other modes. So it could have helped connect all these features together. But yeah, it's always felt like never really reaching its full potential there, and I'll talk about that a bit later on with something else as well. So that was it for Brawl. You had Break the Targets, the 5 levels, Subspace Emissary, boss battles, and the stage builder. Of course, there's previous modes from the previous games. I'll recap that all at the end. Going into Smash 4. So Smash 4, Wii U, Smash 4, 3DS. I've always loved that pun. Had different modes that were in each version. And so the 3DS version was a bit more simplified. There was less in it. You know, it didn't even have the 8-player Smash. It didn't have... I don't know, like these certain modes in particular. For the most part, I think they kind of tried to make these games as similar as possible, but they are ultimately different. So the 3DS doesn't have a whole lot of unique modes added to it. It had Street Smash, which is essentially the, you know, like a little pun on Street Pass there, where if you had your 3DS, you're traveling around and you, I don't know, turn on the Street Pass setting. If you pass someone in the world who has that also turned on, you'd get like them as an opponent, but it's like they weren't really battles. Like I think this would have made sense for like the Mii or the Amiibo functionality, but I think it was more just like you had like a peg on this little map, and it was almost like shuffleboard or curling. You're like trying to smash these other things off. So a very weird little addition. You know, it was fun enough, and I think you'd get some unlocks from it. But mostly I would interact with this mode when I'd go to tournaments back in the day when Smash 4 was the big deal, the newest Smash game, and so I'd get a lot of street passes from people at those tournaments, a lot of other people bringing that. And then you'd also had Smash Run, which is a really underrated mode. I love Smash Run, and I wish it kind of got another chance with Ultimate. But ultimately, this is a multiplayer mode where it's multiplayer or single player, but you pick a character, and just loading up my next YouTube video here. Just have so you guys have something to watch here as I'm going through this all. Let's go with this next one here. But yeah, you would pick a character. You'd go through this giant map. It was very similar to what you would encounter in Subspace Emissary in terms of platforming sequences, different kind of locations and underground, up in the sky area. And you're going around collecting upgrades to your character. Maybe that's stats or like certain item type things. And then at the end of the timer, it'd be like 5 minutes of that. You'd run around and get a bunch of stuff. At the end of the timer, you would be given a random battle. I think this is maybe one of the weaker parts about it is there wasn't really any customization. You couldn't pick what that final battle was like. You couldn't change how long you could do the Smash Run. You couldn't change how many battles there were after it. So sometimes you'd like go around, maybe you'd get really powerful. You got a bunch of power upgrades for your character, but then like the final battle is like a race to the finish. And it's like, okay, well, now all these upgrades I got aren't really useful anymore. Or it could be the opposite, where maybe you got a bunch of speed updates, but then it's just like a purely like a all metal battle or something, so you need a bunch of strength and you just don't have that. So it was still a really fun mode, mostly for that first like 5 minutes of running around collecting stuff and fighting random enemies. I don't think you could actually bump into other players in that. You were kind of if you did it multiplayer, you were all in your own world, which is why it once again feels like more of a single player thing. But I really loved this mode. I think it had a lot of potential. I think it would have been cool if it got updates, and I think it would have been hard. I guess you could have done a split screen in Ultimate, but like it was one of those things that worked well as everyone having their own 3DS. But even in single player, I still played a ton of this mode. Going over to the Wii U side of things, the kind of equivalent there was Smash Tour. Smash Tour was, I call it like kind of like a Mario Party type mode within Smash, but it wasn't really as good or as well thought out as Mario Party. There might have been different maps, but they were all kind of basic. It was kind of a similar thing where you're going around collecting upgrades and then you're doing battles. And it was longer than Smash Run. It was kind of like a more collective thing. But I don't know. It never really did it for me. And I didn't play it a ton, to be honest. So maybe there's something that was just missing there. But ultimately, it was just not really one of my favorite modes, not one I spent a lot of time with. There was also the addition of Special Orders, which is one I completely forgot about until I was looking up all this stuff and watching videos of the modes I couldn't quite remember. And in Special Orders, there was kind of two subcategories. There were the Master Orders and Crazy Orders. And so you essentially go in, you'd have your currency, you'd pick a tier battle, easier versus harder ones, and you would do some very specific type of battles, kind of like event mode. from the earlier games, from Brawl and Melee, where it'd be a very specific type of battle that you would do, and then it would give you some unlock at the end there. So crazy orders would obviously be the more intense ones. Master orders were a bit more simplified. I think is kind of how it was set up there. Once again, not one I spent a whole lot of time with. And then the Wii U also added Target Blast, which I'm sure most people completely forget. But this was, by the time Wii U came around, there was no longer break the targets at all in the games. And so this is kind of their way of keeping the spirit of it, where it was similar to Home Run Contest, where there was a big bomb, and you'd smash the bomb, deal damage to it. It would fly, and then it would like hit a bunch of targets and blow things up. This was not very good. It was not very fun. It was not that engaging. Really, the only reason I played it at all was I remember specifically, in Wii U, it was so hard to get all the special move unlocks, but I wanted all of them all because I just wanted to see them and mess around with them. And this is something with Ganondorf. I remember my friend had like a turbo controller, so it had like extra buttons on it, and so we would just set this up so that it would like auto play Target Blast, and it would just auto Ganondorf smash this thing, smash all these targets, and I would just leave it on for hours, and then when I'd come back, it would unlock all these special moves for me. So that was like really the only purpose it had for me was using this kind of gimmick to unlock all the special moves without me having to grind them all out. But it was not a very fun mode. So I think the biggest takeaway here is that like Wii U 3DS, like kind of a weaker addition in terms of the single player for the setting. I think part of that is probably because they were stretched thin, trying to create these two different versions, make the mobile version, make it work on 3DS, but then also have these different additions for Wii U. So there's that. And then going into Ultimate. So Ultimate really only has 2 new additions, and they're kind of even condensed into one in a way. And that is the World of Light, and through World of Light you also have the Spirit Board. So this is kind of the new version of Subspace Emissary or Adventure Mode, where you're going around this huge map, traveling around, moving on. It's almost actually a little bit similar to Smash Tour as well. You're moving around this map, picking different battles, and it's very similar to Event Mode, where there's different changes, improvements or weaknesses on these characters. Maybe you're fighting multiple, maybe you can't touch the ground, all these different things. And this is kind of the incentive is like the spirits. You're fighting these different spirits in World of Light, and you can also fight them on the Spirit Board. And they're kind of like, give you Marth, but it'll like change his stats, so he's like a different character from Fire Emblem. And this is like, instead of trophies, they had these spirits, right? And you're, I don't know, doing these imaginary battles, so to speak. I think World of Light compared to Subspace Emissary, it didn't have as many cutscenes. It still had some that were cool, and it had a couple cool moments, but for the most part, I feel like both these modes are vast quantity at the cost of lower quality. You're not really that engaged with it, but there's a lot there to do. And even when I go into Ultimate and I do some single player stuff, I'll still go to the Spirit Board and do a couple battles, but like it doesn't really keep me that engaged. I'd rather go do classic mode or all-star mode or something. So yeah, kind of a weird addition. I don't think it was very successful, but I understand with just how many characters they had in Ultimate, and they added a lot of additions to like online play or the multiplayer modes, which I think is good. It's good to focus on those things, but I think it's definitely at the cost of like less iconic single player modes. So there you go. There's kind of the history of it. There's a couple honorable mentions I'll show out here. These are things I'm not counting. Race to the Finish has never been a mode that you can select from the menu, but is more like integrated into usually classic mode would be where it's at. And this would be just, you kind of have to run to the end of a level, and then you'll get some bonus at the end of it, or you're just trying to do it within a certain time frame there. Different trophy ways to collect trophies, like in Melee, there was like almost like a little bingo machine you could do. In I think Wii U, there was like this falling block thing where you have to kind of smash these different blocks out of the way. Melee as well had this thing where there was like a thing in the center that would collect trophies, and you had to like kind of run around and smack the trophies into the center so they'd get collected, so you get them. Challenges, it's worthy of a shout out here. As I mentioned with Ultimate, there was like all this huge challenge board that would give you different things you could go do. Brawl had it as well. I forget if Wii U had it. So that's kind of an incentive to go do other single player things. And then, honorable mention, of course, just all the additions they've made to Smash, like just the basic versus battle in terms of adding tournament play, or like Ultimate added like the thing where you could pick a roster of like 3 characters and you'd alternate between them. Ability to like freeze hazards. Like there's been so many additions to that, which of course in single player I still did a bunch of that stuff, making up fun little battles in my mind, but I'm not really counting that for the purpose of what this podcast is about. So there you go. I think let's do a quick recap here and talk about and break it down by game. So the modes that exist in all games would be classic mode. Now it's weird, like in Smash 64, it's not called that. It's just called one player game. And there's different changes and iterations to this mode throughout all the games. They all behave slightly differently, but I'm going to consider it all as one. Classic mode. Training mode exists in all games. Pretty straightforward. Multi-man melee. I don't think I mentioned this. I was going through. I must have forgot to write this down in my notes. Oh, I wrote it there. I just forgot to mention it. This was added in Melee, and it exists in, I believe, every game since. And multi-man Melee is pretty simple. You go in and you pick either 100-man Melee or Cruel Melee. There's different ones. You just have to fight these kind of polygon-type creatures. And so, yeah, you either have to kill 100 of them or just fight the cruel ones, which are really, really strong. And so I'm considering this to be in all games because even though this wasn't a mode you could select in Smash 64, this was something that would be integrated into the classic mode. So you could still do it. So yeah, just for the sake of this, I'm going to consider that just one multi-man melee there, or multi-man Smash, I guess we should call it. And then a couple modes that were in every game except Smash 64, so added in Melee and then continued, is All-Star mode and then Home Run Contest. Of course, All-Star mode changes from game to game in terms of how it's structured. With Ultimate, you have so many characters that it works a bit differently than it does in Melee, but still worth a shout out there. Modes that exist in 3 games would be Event Mode, that's in Melee, Brawl, and Smash 4. And then the Stage Builder is in Brawl, Wii U, and Ultimate. Exists in 2 games. I'm calling Break the Targets the character-specific one, so that's in 64 and Melee. And then games that are kind of in one game, but are not really a one-off, like they're kind of an iteration or a change on a previous mode. That would be Break the Targets, the 5-level one from Brawl, Adventure Mode, Subspace, and World of Light. They're all very much their own thing, but you can see how they're kind of an evolution of each other. Smash Tour, Target Blast, and Special Orders from Wii U, Smash Run from 3DS, and then the Spirit Board as well from Ultimate there. And then the things that I can kind of consider a true one-off is the Boss Battle mode from Brawl, Board the Platforms from Smash 64, and then Street Smash from 3DS. As small as that mode is, it's worthy of shouting out there as its own thing. And then, yeah, so before I rank these, that's kind of the highlight of what all of them are. I wanted to just quickly talk about how some of these things are definitely iterations or evolutions of each other. So Break the Targets, it's fun to kind of track the history of that from being the character-specific version in 64 Melee to the 5-level version in Brawl, and then kind of Target Blast in Smash 4 Wii U there. So I kind of talked about that, but it's interesting to see how that's always been kind of in there. And then Ultimate is the first time where there's, not a target to be found anywhere. Smash Tour, as I mentioned, kind of feels like you can see the evolution into World of Light there. If you look at it, like even the way the map looks in Smash Tour looks very similar to the overworld map in World of Light. So that's interesting. Events is kind of something that evolved into Special Orders, and then the Spirit Board. That's kind of the way I look at it there. And then, Smash 64 had Classic Mode, which kind of feels like it evolved in Adventure Mode in Melee, even though they kept Classic Mode. And then that evolved into Subspace, into nothing for Smash 4, interestingly enough, and then World of Light for Ultimate there. So cool to see that kind of primary single-player mode change and evolve over time. And then Special Orders as well, I kind of mentioned this, but this is very similar to Classic Mode. Special Orders is very similar to the Spirit Board in Ultimate is what I meant to say there. So you can kind of see some evolutions there. And then let's see. I think with that, we can kind of get into the actual ranking a bit here. So I've kind of broken this into 3 tiers. There's the bottom tier, the mid tier, and then the top tier. It's kind of an oversimplification, but I think it's good to look at it this way. So in the bottom tier, I have 20 things here from my list of breakdown there. I've kind of categorized them into 20 things. Number 20 is Target Blast from Wii U. As I mentioned, just very weak. And then I'll just raffle off these bottom ones actually. 19 Smash Orders or Special Orders, 18 Street Smash, and then 17 is Smash Tour. So interestingly enough, that whole bottom tier consists of 3DS and Wii U exclusive modes. So I'll talk about that a little bit later on. In the mid tier there, at number 16, I'm putting training mode. Of course, it's very useful. It's great that it exists, but it's just not that engaging if you're not like a competitive level player. You're not really going to use it. But I'm glad that it exists. At number 15, I put the stage builder. I did put it this low because there's just a lack of features and lack of engagement that it has given me over the years. Number 14 is where I'm putting multi-man smash, multi-man melee. It's fun enough, but it's never kind of my go-to in terms of even just trying to push my own high scores. It's not one I really care to do. Number 13 is where I'm putting the Spirit board from Ultimate, and then at 12 is where I put World of Light. So I kind of put them right next to each other because they do feel like one kind of collective mode. This might seem a bit low, like even related to other modes above it that are way simpler, but as I mentioned, it's quantity over quality, and I think I prefer quality in this case. Glad it exists, but it definitely doesn't blow me away. At number 11 is where I'm putting Break the Targets from Brawl, like the 5-level one. I still love Break the Targets. It's definitely not the same as it is in the other games, but it's still worthy of a shout out, of course. And then we're into the top 10. Number 10, I put the home run contest. It's kind of an underrated one, not one I immediately think of, but it's like it is fun. It's always one I spend a lot of time with in Melee, and in Ultimate I've done a lot of it with all the characters as well. It is fun to go back and check it out, and it's also a fun one to watch, like see the records, like all the crazy just optimization that people do on it is cool. And I just love that it's kind of been a mainstay, since Melee it's been in there, and it's always the same. And I think that's perfect for a home run contest. It doesn't need to change. You just need to, with the new characters, you want to maybe try it out, or with the new moveset for a character, see what kind of record you can get. Number 9 is where I'm putting the boss battles from Brawl. Really cool mode, just this boss rush mode that I think this is just no brainer. It's weird that it was not included in Ultimate. Number 8 is where I'm putting Board the Platforms from Smash 64. Always love this mode. I think it's really cool. It's too bad that it's never made a return in a bigger way. Number 7 is where I'm putting event mode. Of course, it's changed. Like in Melee, there was not difficult. They got harder as you went on, but there weren't. From what I remember, I don't think there was like easy, medium, hard. Brawl added that. I remember that. And then Wii U 3DS, I think, had the very similar thing with it. Yeah, always been a cool mode. Just a fun way to get these exclusive battles. But it very much focuses on quality over quantity. Like there isn't a whole lot of duds in there. They're all at least interesting to do the first time. Number 6 is where I'm putting All-Star mode. I think it kind of speaks for itself. Number 5, top 5 is where I'm putting Classic mode. This might seem maybe too high for how simple the mode is, but it's just, I think it has like the perfect runtime. Maybe takes like 15 minutes to do a run through. Just gives you a good variety for each of the characters. It's just always a classic, and I like that. Always a classic, pun intended there. And I'm glad that it exists in all games and is different and fun in its own ways. Number 4 is where I'm putting Smash Run. That's how much I love this mode. And, part of it is definitely because I did a lot of multiplayer with friends playing it. But even as a single player mode, it's one I played a lot as well. And is really fun, and one I would hope to see again someday. Number 3 is where I'm putting Adventure mode from Melee. I think it was really unique. And even thinking back on it and going back to it, like it is still fun to do, and is, even though it's not as vast as World of Light, I still think it's better in terms of quality. Number 2 is where I'm putting Break the Targets, the character-specific one from 64 and Melee. I love Break the Targets, and I wish it was still around. I understand why they don't do this anymore, just with how many characters there is. It's a lot of work to make this individual map and visual style for it, but I think it would be worth doing. And then number 1, with no surprise, it's Subspace Emissary. Just such a vast mode. The platforming sequences, all the battles, the boss battles, the CGI cutscenes, the unlocking of characters. It was such a huge success. And once again, I understand why they haven't put that much effort into a single player mode since, because people mostly play Smash Bros. For the multiplayer of it, and something like making online play better makes sense as like that being of more of a priority when you're developing a new game over making another Subspace. But someday I hope we do get another version of this. It's something I want to do as another separate kind of topic on Sidequest, is talk about like what the future of Smash could look like. And I think if we really reduce the roster, make some changes to it, and give another big single player mode, I think that would be worthy of I don't know, something of a sequel, or maybe like a spin-off for the series. But like I said, that's kind of a discussion for another day. So that's the tier list there. I want to talk about a little bit a couple takeaways, and then just some potential. So what I mentioned with targets and break the targets aboard the platforms, I can understand why they haven't added these modes back, but I think one of the biggest misses in the series is not integrating that into the stage builder in some way. I think just not making your own break the targets maps, but instead just giving that to the players to make cool ones and make it easier to download and find other people's would be a great way to do it. Where, of course, people would recreate the ones from the earlier games, and that would be fun to try with different characters. But people would make like really interesting challenges and difficult ones, or just fun ones to go through and break those targets, board those platforms. I think that'd be just such a fun thing to do, and people could essentially make aboard the platforms via stage builder, but it's not the same. It's just not. And then having like maybe a high score element of having those be able to download them online and then see other people's scores and try and beat them, I think would be really fun. So I hope they add that with the next iteration. I find it highly unlikely they would do the board the platforms part of it, just because that's been forgotten since the 90s at this point. But I think with break the targets, that would be a great way to bring that mode back without them having to do a whole lot of work. Like, that's simplifying it, of course. Making that integration and being able to download maps would be work, but I think they wouldn't have to actually make individual maps for everyone. Smash Run, I think that should definitely come back at some point and just have a lot more customization to it. Change how many battles there are. Maybe make it so there's like you get to do the Smash Run section for 2 minutes and then do a battle, and then you get to go back in there for another 3 minutes, improve your character, and then go to a different battle and pick what those final battles are going to be. I think there's a lot of potential there, and maybe some different maps or more changing of the maps could be something that would be really cool. And then, as I mentioned, with Stage Builder in general, like obviously for the board, the platforms, break the targets, but then also just more features there, more variety in terms of what you can make, the ability to make better looking maps, different unique hazards. I think that would all be really cool. Or even like maybe specific item spawn locations that could play into something interesting as well. So that's something I hope to see added in the future. And then, yeah, we've gone the ranking. I've talked about these modes. Like, what are the biggest takeaways from going through and like analyzing and looking at all these? I think the big one for me is just like, wow, there are a lot more modes than I remember. As someone who's played these games religiously my whole life, I kind of forgot about a few of these, or forgot about some of the functionality of them. And it's interesting to just see how much they've done and how much work they've put into it, even though it's never really been the primary function of these games. You can see that with something like Ultimate, like how they went kind of all in on the World of Light mode, but like they still had all these other previous modes in there as well. So it's cool to see. And then lastly, like Smash 4, both Wii U and the 3DS version, is a really weird point in the series, because if you look at 64 Brawl and Melee versus the Ultimate Smash 4 era, like visually very different style those games had, whereas Smash 4 and like all those games too, like built from the ground up, play completely differently, look very different in their art style. But with Ultimate, obviously, this is the first time in the series where they took Smash 4 as the foundation and then like built off of it, for lack of a better word, copy pasted Smash 4 and then made changes there. And it's like, in general, Ultimate, of course, is going to be the version that people are going to go to, because it has all the characters plus more. Everyone is here, that whole thing. And then it takes the mechanics and adds a couple new things, makes the gameplay a bit quicker, snappier, more fun in general. So it makes for like that reason alone, Smash 4 is kind of going to be lost to time in a way. And even like the 3DS element, that was so unique because it was, Smash Bros on the go for the first time. But now with Ultimate and the Switch, of course, you can do that too. So because of that, like Smash 4 has just lacked an identity. I think in the history of time, it's going to lack its identity. But I also think a big reason for that is that it didn't really have a lot of unique, or if it did have unique modes, they weren't very good for the single player stuff. As I mentioned, like mostly at the bottom tier there, and all the higher tier stuff in my ranking was things that were also in other Smash Bros games. And so maybe there's like a unique events or something, but Melee and Brawl are still going to give you events. Ultimate's going to give you the spirit battles. So I feel like for many reasons now, that's something I'd never thought about, is Smash 4 is going to really lack an identity for many reasons. And a big part of that, once again, is that single player mode and the lack of interest there. So that's too bad. And then I think, my last takeaway here is that like And I knew going into this list that, of course, Subspace Emissary is going to be my number one ranked mode. But damn, Brawl really just did have the best single player, and it still does all these years later. Um, Subspace is, of course, the biggest part of that, but it still had target test in some form. It had events, it had classic mode, it had all star mode, and then it also had boss battles, which is another unique mode that no other game has had since. So I think just without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, Brawl is the best game in the series in terms of the single player element of it. And that's also a bit of a bummer. One, because of the accessibility of it these days is a bit. Not many people have a Wii plugged in anymore, so you're not going to just as easily boot it up. But I also think it's the game that has aged the worst in terms of the actual minute-to-minute gameplay of it. The game feel of it, it's slow, sluggish, floaty, it has tripping, all these things that just make it not as fun to go back and play as it once was, which is too bad because it has all these unique modes and I'd want to go back and play them, but then it's like, well, then I have to play with Brawl's mechanics, which, of course, I'm such a diehard Melee fan now that it's especially hard to do that. But even just compared to Ultimate, which is just a way better game feel and has all those characters, it's like there's not much reason to go back to it other than those single player modes. So, yeah, it's kind of all there's a pro and a con to all of them, and no game has got it perfect, unfortunately. And so I think there's still a lot of potential for Smash as a series in terms of the single player element to it. And I hope it's something that they continue to focus on and highlight, even though as time goes on, more and more people are just going to play. When they go back to Smash now, they're going to go back for the online play or go back to play with their friends. But I wish there was more work put into making those single player modes great. So thank you everyone for listening to this episode. I know it was some little different and maybe a bit of a frantic episode, but I just truly love Smash Bros. I love to think about it as a series and how it's evolved and changed over the years. And yeah, the single player element of it is an interesting angle to look at it from. So like I said, thank you everyone for listening. This is not in place of a weekly side quest. You're still going to get that coming out in a few days. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.